Art Chat is made possible by the support of the Artistic Harmonies Association. Create your next aha experience with us. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Art Chat. I'm your host, Linda Riesenberg Fisler, and today I'm very, very happy and glad to welcome back Michael Harding. Hi, Michael.
Hi, Linda. Hi, everybody. Lovely to be here.
Yeah, I was thinking the other day, we met first out at Weekend with the Masters.
That's
and
right.
that was the first Art Chat I did with you.
Oh,
And
yeah.
it has been, I was talking the other day with Kevin McPherson, it has been probably 10 to 12 years that we've known each other now.
It's got to be something like that. I remember the event well. It was for those of you who don't know, I have an American wife, so it's sort of, we got together 12, 13 years ago. So going to that event down in San Diego was sort of the first of those events for me.
Right.
We don't tend to have, UK being a smaller population, we don't tend to have events like the Weekend with the Masters, unfortunately, not quite the same style. So it was a real eye-opener for me. It was very exciting. And yeah, we got to talk and got to do one of our online chats, which was a lot of fun. I remember.
Right. And then I think I still remember to this day how watching the Masters paint with your paint, CW, I think, was painting with, I think George Gallo was painting with it.
That's right.
And maybe a few others, Alexi, maybe.
Lexi was drawing, and
yeah, that's
I remember
right.
Because I've got the drawing in the other room actually, which was of Michael Maitler. CW Monday was, I think, probably the most striking of them all, because
Right.
do you remember when we were chatting on your show?
Yes.
And I almost issued a challenge to him, and I remember, of course, because it's only radio, the
Right.
audience couldn't see what was going on.
Yeah, at that time
But
it was only radio.
I basically said to CW, I live, I can change your life as an artist. And he just looked across the table and just went,
yeah.
are you mad?
Yeah.
And I then sort of looked at him and said, yeah, I can change your life as an artist. I guarantee if you paint with my paint tomorrow, you will be saying some quite extraordinary things about the paint. And he went, oh, okay, then. All right. I see this is a bit of a challenge. Okay, we'll do this. And I remember he set up the next day, and in typical CW style, he always approaches his painting by praying to his Lord and so on. So he did that, and then he started painting, and then my heart dropped, because he started, he probably had, say, 10 colors out of our oils, and he was going like, oh, this is strange.
Yeah.
Oh, this is what I was expecting. Oh.
I remember I was standing next to you when this was going on.
And I just thought, right, okay, keep smiling, Michael, keep smiling. And then he suddenly went, oh, I see, I get it. And then he went silent, I think, for something like half an hour, and he just attacked.
Yes.
And he then, I think the next day, I think I'm right in saying that he asked if he could come back live on the show again to say, Michael Harding's changed my life as an artist. And since then, he's been a firm user and a good friend and a good ambassador for us. And
yes.
so I can proudly say I changed his life in a positive way as an artist.
Yes, and mine, because I think at that time I was
you.
struggling because of the limits that the specific paint that I was using, not understanding a lot about paint at that time. So I thank you for the 10 years of education that you provided me.
It's not so much about education, it's the sort of, for me, I mean, obviously, when I make paint, I make it as the texture and the feels that I would be looking for as an artist. And I sort of hope that what I'm making actually is the same for you guys like that.
It is.
And sure enough, the feedback is such. And the thing for me, the overall philosophy is that those materials have to be your friends.
Mm-hmm.
If you're fighting them, something's wrong.
Right.
If you're trying to get it to do something and it won't go that way, the way that's in, say, your mind's eye, then you've got to ask certain questions about it. You may even conclude you're working with the wrong medium.
Mm-hmm.
You might be not an oil painter or not a watercolor painter. You might be finding that you're better in acrylic.
Right.
But no, you've got those materials should almost be, you should almost be unaware that you're painting in some ways. They should almost become an extension of your mind that they'll just do for you without. without having to be worked. Because as I always say to artists, painting's hard enough as it is without making it harder.
Absolutely.
You've got to take these hurdles away, so that process, that image that's in your mind's eye, can get out onto whatever that surface is in an unhindered way without those obstructions.
Yeah, absolutely. And we want to jump in and talk about your watercolors, because
Definitely.
you have been working. This has been a long journey. I mean, I remember asking you, I don't know how many years, but a number of years, saying, so how are the watercolors doing? And it's, well, not yet. So
Well, yes. I mean, there's always loads of excuses. I think paint makers, we have a different sort of life, and of course, I wear two hats as an artist and as a paint maker. I mean, for those of you who don't know me, this is my life. This is what I'm immersed in. This is what I do. I'm not one of you artists who have to paint every day, although I've got a nice plan of a painting. I had a bit of misfortune this week. I had a bad toothache, so I had to get up early one morning. The very kind dentist said he could fit me in for an examination, but he said, would you mind coming just after 7 in the morning, which clearly he was making time for me. I said, yeah, of course. And so I jumped out of bed when it was, I jumped in the car and started driving up the road, and I was confronted by, there's a particular high spot locally called Sawyer Hill here in Massachusetts. And we normally get the westerly view from there, and you get tremendous sunsets. Now, this conversely, because it was dawn, I was looking 180 degrees the other way to the east, and the sunrise was astounding. And it was, of course, a view. Yeah, there's great trees and another sort of view, but of course, one's eyes generally always lean towards the sunset. On this occasion, of course, it was sunrise, and it was just this orange glow, and it was like, oh. So if I make the painting work, I'm going to call the painting something like root canal treatment, because that's effectively what it was. And I thought to myself,
Lovely.
you know, this is a rather fortuitous toothache that's led me to see this wonderful, wonderful view from the alternate side. So yeah, if the painting succeeds, it'll be the size of this one behind me. It'll be termed something like root canal treatment, and there'll be a footnote explaining the little story behind it, because you know, you don't often associate something in wonderful epic nature thing with something negative like that. But no, so anyway, yes, I got up. I can't remember why I got onto this now.
Your journey on watercolors.
Yeah, I've got a painting, a big painting coming. I shall probably do it, first of all, get to know it. Other people call it preparatory sketches. I call it getting to know the subject. I shall do it initially. Probably I'll rattle off a couple of watercolors. I want to get that glow, and I know I can. And I'll back engineer my judgments from there, because of course, if the punchline of the painting is that glowing sky with trees in front of it, it's a hard thing, of course, to step up to the luminosity. So what I'll do is I'll create the luminosity and come back down from it, so I get the tonal values correct that way around. It's probably a standard trick for lots of people, but that's the way I'll approach it. And so I'll do 2 getting to know sketches at least in watercolor. Incidentally, just for any of you who are interested in the history of watercolors, the phrase, the term that was used to describe originally watercolors, believe it or not, was drawings.
Really?
Oh yeah, and the idea was that artists like Turner, who had to get out into the landscape, they needed a mobile medium. They didn't have cameras, obviously. They needed a quick way to be able to take notes down, and this was therefore the drawings or the watercolors. So that's the advent of them, and the thing that has always frustrated me as an artist, and when I look at the art world, is that watercolors never seem to be held on the same pedestal as oils. And I think that's because where one of the reasons where it came from, because it was always seen as the
preliminary
warm-up,
sketch.
if you like. It was the sketch. It was the less formal. But having painted for years in both, I have to say, painting in watercolors comes with a completely different science, and I'm still struggling enormously. In fact, I'm not even sure I'm getting anywhere with oils, because oils do exactly what you direct them to do. In a sense, there's no excuses. If you can't get an oil painting to work, you've only got yourself to blame. Whereas with watercolors, it's a whole different juggling act, as And well, talk to me in another 40 years about that, and I'll see how I've see if I've progressed anywhere. Because yes, I enjoy watercolors enormously, but whoa, those guys! It's a bit like trying to ride a wild horse. It can suddenly go shooting out from underneath you in a direction you didn't expect, and the predictability, the science of that predictability is, you know, for you guys out there who paint regularly in watercolors, you know what I'm talking about, and I'm probably stating the obvious. But yeah, so coming back to what you're saying, Linda, yes, they have been a long time coming. It's about, I think I first wanted to do watercolors at least 20 years ago, because when I was starting in the East End of London back, restarting back in the East End of London in the 90s, when the oils were becoming popular, people would always make the assumption, oh, well, are we going to get watercolors soon? And I'd be thinking, yeah, that would be, of course, why not? But as the oil business has grown, it's been now impossible to find time to keep developing. And when I ever did start to formulate and look at the logistics of a whole range of watercolors, that something else would always come along, and I'd have to go and make some oils or something like that. So, but the wonderful thing that's happened, and then Linda and I were just touching upon this before the call started, I will be adding a whole load of new oils as a result of the watercolors, because naturally, when I started looking at which watercolors I would have in the range, I thought, well, where I can, I will parallel across. If it's a color which I've really, really enjoyed making as an oil, if the pigment can be used in a watercolor, because of course we have to keep away from things like lead colors, because of watercolors are more of an open system, and the lead thing wouldn't work so well. So when I started exploring and adding new pigments to the watercolors, which I'd never used in oils, of course, I kept on coming across things, and I'd be going, oh, this would look good in oil. If it looks this good in watercolor, I'm sure it's going to be marvelous also in oil. And of course, we'd play around and do some, and it was like, oh yes, this is, and I'd be thinking, oh, what am I going to do? Because I'm, the intended range of the watercolors was something like 130 or 40. The oils have been sort of plateauing around the 90s for quite a few years. And of course, the watercolors, therefore, being a range 30 or 40 more, I just looked and I thought, well, I'm sure loads of these we can add to the oil range as well backwards. And lo and behold, I've then realized that it's 40 years. It'll be 40 years, I think, it was in 1983 that I first started making and selling oil colors on a very small scale from my bedroom, quite literally, which was also my studio and my bedroom. And so to be 40 new colors for 40 years. So we'll have a little bit of a splash, a sort of an announcement about that, hopefully in 2023. So, who'd have thought from 1983 to 2023, I'd be where I am today, let alone living in America. Half my life is spent here. in my color mill. And
well, we're glad to have you here.
Thank you very much.
Us Americans.
Yes, I know. There's always lots of jokes about, don't you Brits feel you still? And I all the standard jokes go on and everything like that. And right. I periodically, one of my passions is I like to swan around in period clothing. So I dress up as a redcoat, particularly July 4th, which is always a bit of a fun, because it's a sort of tongue-in-cheek way of poking back the fun at you Americans. Just to let you know, we could be back. I could be part of the re-invasion force, and I could I've already taken the country, or starting to take the country by color.
There you go.
My red coat. So there we go.
There you go. Sounds good. So we were talking a little bit earlier too about the watercolors are much more potent than perhaps the watercolor artists are painting with today. So I'm assuming that goes back to the same type of theory that you used with the oil paints, which is mostly pigment, and you leave some other fillers or whatever out of.
Yeah, I mean, there would have been no point in just bringing out another, I don't want to sound too derogatory, but another dreary watercolor range that just wishy-washy. I wanted the colors to be somehow different, and I actually a couple of times I even thought, wow, this is almost like creating a new medium here, although it's made in a similar way, gum arabic and similar ingredients. I wanted it to have the same signature, if you like, that the oils. My oils are known for the color, saturation, potency, chroma, and I wanted the same with the watercolors. I literally wanted to, in an unashamed way, poke your eye out with color. I always want color to shock people.
Right.
You can always mute down or calm color down.
Mm-hmm.
You can't bring it up and zing it up. The more you, the seasoned artists, they will know exactly what I'm talking about. When you intermix colors, the last thing you want is mud, which we generally, I don't think we ever get when told. You want the colors still to be going somewhere. So if you try my watercolors and you find them over powerful, then just use less. You'll find they'll go considerably further than standard watercolors. And the color saturation, the zing is there. They will be as light fast as you can expect a watercolor to be. By definition, a watercolor is a much more exposed paint system than an oil, in terms of the thinness of the layer of paint on the paper. And so of course watercolors are slightly more vulnerable in that way. So if you have a permanent pigment, it also is a question of how much you dilute it. And even if you take a really robust pigment, say like cadmium red, the more you dilute it in oil or in watercolor medium, the more exposed those pigment particles are, and they will eventually, sadly, nothing is forever. And but common sense stuff. Make sure your watercolors are away from direct sunlight, windows casting light over a room throughout a day. Get them behind archival glass if you can. That all helps. I mean, we all work with the same laws of physics. So even if you have got the finest pigment you can get, it's also a question of where it's placed and how it's handled that also make a difference to its longevity. So, these are simple pointers, but I always have to remind people that unfortunately nothing is forever.
Right. And it's really kind of interesting too, because I can thinking back, there is a learning curve with your oil paints. There'll be a learning curve with your watercolor paints. And I don't mean that in a bad way, because what you're doing is you're expanding how you can use this material to your benefit, how you want to use it. So I can remember talking to a few artists. It may have been at Weekend with the Masters. It may have been in Art in North Carolina, get together, whatever. And they were telling me that, every time I use Michael's paints, I really have to remember that I need to step back and think about what I'm mixing and how I'm mixing it. But she says, I never can get to mud, basically. And I said, well, I don't know what you're calling mud, but I mean, I can make beautiful browns if that's what you're calling mud.
Yeah.
But, I can use that to gray down, some of the strength. So, and I'm assuming it's somewhat similar, although the technique would be different with oil colors. It's still somewhat the same, how you glaze over another color to create whatever effect that you're trying to get with an oil color.
Yeah. I mean, I think that obviously all you artists out there, you all have your own different techniques and spin, and the way that you find your way through, if you like, your journey almost of making decision making. It will be a little different for people, in a pleasant way, as Linda pointed out. And I think it's just a question of, if you are kind enough to try my watercolors, I would invite people to, on that first adventure, just use MH watercolors just on their own. I mean, we'll be doing a little sample sets of 4 colors, which will give people a pretty good tryout. Just treat that first painting as if it's an experiment. Don't treat it as if this is going to be the work of my life. Just think, okay, I'm going to have some fun today. All I'm going to do is put some paint out and just see, just doodle, just see what happens. And that will be a way of gauging the power, and then the predictability. You will all notice that in whatever watercolors you've been using in the past, where you take a little splodge and you do this and that with it, take a quarter of the amount this time and add water, and then you will see the power, and the power when it comes. more transparent, and you'll see that that tint power is shocking. It's still shocking to me every time I paint with it, because you start to see color in a different sort of way, and the nuances, and there's no sort of noise, if you like, in the background of the visual thing you're seeing, because you get sort of color noise as well with some other stuff. I've tried to make the paint as clean as I possibly can. It's a bit like a musical note with no noise in the background. That's the way I think of it.
Mm.
But you'll find that the paint will go hugely further than you're probably used to. Mm-hmm. And as I said, maybe in some ways think of it as a new medium, and just explore it. Yeah. Don't be scared. And you know, the feedback from all the artists that have tried it so far, they're loving it. It's going to be on sale in the US in January, February timescale, we believe. And we had a couple of holdups in terms of the documentation we have to have for the health and safety people in the US, the material safety data sheets, which are now in place. So they're all good to go. And on that note, the range is free of, as I said, anything like leads. There's no colors in there which are deemed to be toxic in the sense of things like leads. There are cadmiums in there, and they come with the appropriate Prop 65 warnings. But there's nothing in there which is normally deemed to be something which would be like a lead or you know, don't eat it anyway. But
you always have to say that nowadays, don't we? Don't eat it.
I know, as if artists ever have. I did know one artist in the UK used to eat cadmium yellow. That's because he said he liked the smell, but he was a friend of mine, and I just thought, when he told me that, I just said, "Oh no, you haven't, have you?" He goes, "Yeah, it just smells so nice." And I thought, but anyway, that might have explained a lot of his personality, but there we go. Yeah, so I can't wait for you all to try it. It'll be available in the US imminently. Check with our website, check with Linda. I'm sure she would be kind enough also to do appropriate social media posts. We will be, as soon as they're unleashed, if you like, here. We've been having great success in the UK and the other little outposts around the world that have been able to take it sooner. It wasn't by any design or malice that we're holding it back from the US. It's simply the
rigmarole to get us here.
The material safety notice thing, which we had to have in place before it could be sold commercially in the US. So that's the reason.
Yeah, great. I know that you showed me a color chart. Do you want to pop that up and talk a little bit about the colors that you have?
Yeah, I mean, of course, we've got all the standard things you'd expect to have. I mean, just so everyone can see it like that. And if people want to take a screenshot of it, I'll try and hold it steady like that for a few seconds. I think with a recorded Zoom thing, you probably also pedal backwards for a few seconds, but that should get it. And I'll show each one of these up as there's 4 sheets here. Okay. So I'll talk through them, and I'll just scan down with my eyes. Of course, we've got the usual culprits, things like titanium white, Chinese white, and then there's a few sort of mixes which are based on my oil range: warm white, warm light yellow. Lots of I'm looking here straight away at a new yellow, which the lemon yellow here, which is pigment yellow 175. That's a color we will almost certainly have in the oil range. It's one of the 40 which has managed to get itself back engineered into the oil range. The cadmiums, as I said, now I've got to get myself ready to get my tongue around this word. Yellow benzimidazolone. Pigment yellow 151, a gorgeous color. And then, of course, we've got various versions of oranges and the quinacridones coming down here. I'm looking at color index numbers. Pigment red 112, a lot of you will know. Pyroline crimson, oh, gorgeous color. Pigment red 149. Pyrrole reds, we're adding pyrrole reds. Pigment red 254. Cinquezi maroon, which is a slightly troublesome one, because since we've made a lot of the paint, unfortunately, the company that makes the pigment have decided to stop it. But we've got adequate supplies. Cinquezi maroon, which is pigment red 206. It has a wonderfully sort of browny madder tone to it, and it's just it's one of those colors. I mean, it's almost I sometimes feel it's when I'm talking about color like this, I feel like one of those wine experts who, it has a fruity presumptuousness. I think you'll find charming. No, I can go. Of course, we've got a real rose madder, a natural red 9, a really delicate, soft, really in for historic reasons. Of course, I'm not going to start pretending it's a highly light fast color. It can't be by definition, but I have it in the range because of the antiquity. It is beautiful, and of course, if you keep it away from bright light, it will be fine. Then I'll move on to the next sheet here, and again I'll hold it still like that. I mean, I'm hoping that maybe you'll find all this on our website as well anyway, where you can look at the color index numbers.
Yeah, and I'll put your website above us so that they know exactly where to go.
Yeah, this is, but I forgot to state, this is a real hand painted.
I was going to ask you that.
When I said to my guys in Wales, look, we need to have hand painted color charts like our oils. And if any of you have seen our real oil color charts, we have the same strip of paper of real paint that goes round each tube. That same square of sticky paper is also used in our real oil color charts. And of course you can't, we weren't going to have real watercolor paint on the outside of the tubes. Let me hold up the tube here.
Okay, you got it. That's what I was looking for.
That's a watercolor tube anyway. Yeah. Because of course, if that was real watercolor paint there on the tube, as soon as that got wet in your paint box, it would be all over the place and make a mess, because of course it remains soluble. And so we had to put our heads together and think about ways to paint out this. Now, for my poor guys, they pointed out it was a bit like Russian roulette, because if you can imagine, if you line up all the paper like this, you get that brush stroke right, that brush stroke right, that brush stroke right. By the time you're 40 whatever colors down here, if you drip or if you make a mess of it, that sheet is now looking terrible, and it can't really be provided to the public. So my great guys, Kevin, he first of all, he and I just said, it just looks fantastic though, Kevin. Can't you dedicate the rest of your life to this? And he just said, well, look, if you want hundreds of these color charts, we've got to come up with another way. So yes, we found another sticky type of paper that we're painting onto and peeling it off. And so other color charts won't be quite as neat as that. Yeah, it'll be a little square of sticky paper there, which gives them, should we say, a bit of a fighting chance, because you can imagine nothing could be more disheartening than a heavy brush just coming on with too much paint, or
right.
And you mess it up after having got to. Okay, so let me just sort of talk about a couple of belladonna. Now this was which is this belladonna is the Italian Latin name for the deadly nightshade plant. And you're probably thinking, well, why is there, surely this plant hasn't been made into a paint? No, it's a combination of 3 pigments here: pigment violet 23, pigment red 112, pigment blue 29. The boffins amongst you will immediately know which pigments those are, and as I say, rather than me doing that in the limited time we've got here, you can look those up on our website. In the UK, our deadly nightshade plant has a purple berry, and when we were playing around with this, I just happened to go on a walk one day and see berries, and I just thought, oh, I've always, because you're always told as a kid, even though those berries are pretty, you can't eat them. They'll kill you. In fact, they're used for a heart drug. I can't remember how it works exactly, which heart drug it is, but it also has the property of making, if you do eat it, and please don't eat deadly nightshade, the paint is a completely different thing, just so there's no confusion here. It makes the pupils dilate, and hence the Latin name belladonna, beautiful woman. So it just has a lovely romantic history around the name, and I just thought it'd be fun to actually do the same color as the berry, and hence we have belladonna. Other things we have things that you'll be familiar with, like the phthalocyanine blues. Of course, they're really dramatic, and what would we do without phthalo colors? I mean, some people often talk to me about lapis, and I'll come to lapis in a second, because yes, we do have lapises here. Doesn't it look lovely? And it granulates beautifully. A lot of people always say to me, there's this new blue, Yingming blue, and I go, yeah, doesn't. And I always say, look, don't get excited. It doesn't really bring anything to the party. It's very, very similar to cobalt blue. Not that there's anything wrong with cobalt blue, but it comes in about 10 times the price because the raw material of the pigment is so much more expensive. It doesn't really bring anything to the party. I always say to people, look, if you really want something that brings something to the party, you need to be looking at phthalo-cyanine blue if you're talking about blues. And the particular one I'm looking at, of course, here is the 15.3 PB 15.3, which is the very green shade blue. You'll all be familiar with it. Of course, it's used in the printing industry as well as cyan. And that, I mean, that's this behind me there.
So that's the watercolor behind you.
No, that's an oil.
That's the oil. Okay.
But I mean, that's I wanted to. I've seen many students work where they lose control of phthalo colors. I have got a version of this in watercolor. I could go and grab it. In fact, I've got two. It's a color that can really run away with you, and it creeps everywhere, particularly for painting in a bad light. You don't realize it infiltrates all the other colors around it. But I really wanted to see how, in that painting there, how much I could get away with and turn that into, if you like, the property, the theme of the painting was the craziness of the phthalo. But I'm digressing, talking about that thing. Yeah, we've got the sort of usual things, as I say, like Prussian cobalts. We've got 2 shades of cobalt, ultramarine, of course, down here. And then there's the lapis. I'll hold the lapis up so you can hopefully get a... I know it's lights here in this room and obviously what your screen show. So yeah, it's since I started making, I made a whole bunch of watercolor and lapis. Unfortunately, my Afghan merchant's having a few problems with, just to sort of cut a long story short, he bought a huge stock of lapis something like 10 years ago, a couple of tons of it, and it gets used in everything from certain exotic watch faces to even kitchens sorry, bathrooms in places in Saudi Arabia. And unfortunately, his several tons lot was exhausted. And then, so the next batches the price will come up considerably. But anyway, we've managed, because a little goes a longer way in watercolor, I've been able to include it in the range. Those of you who are regular customers of mine in the oils will know that we haven't got the oil version available at the moment, and that's because the last stock of pigment we had, we decided to make into watercolor. So once it runs out in the watercolor, then I'm afraid we're going to have to probably review the price. It's just the way it is, I'm afraid. Let me show you the next sheet. I mean, if those names can be seen, I'm trying to hold it steady. You'll see the sort of the usual culprits, the sort of standard, the cobalt greens, phthalo-cyanine green again. I mean, those modern organic. When I say organic, I mean it's an organic chemistry, not organic in the sense of like organic vegetables, not to be confused. These modern organic pigments, what was originally called the coal tar dye colors, they just lend themselves so wonderfully to be in watercolors. And of course, they originally had a bad reputation as not being light fast. The ones we work with today are as light fast as anything else you'd expect to see. So I'm just looking here. I mean, I'd love people to be able to use things like the aqua green, cobalt teals. I mean, they're just. I was just telling Linda before we started, we were fortunate enough to go and visit Bermuda about 3 weeks ago for the plein air event in Bermuda, which is something that everyone should have a look at, because it's just such a. The event takes place in November, biannually, and it's everything you look at in Bermuda is a painting. It is sensory overload in terms of the stimulation of what you see, and these colors are just Bermuda. So that's something I'd love everyone to try. Green gold, there aren't the words. It's just one of those crazy colors that when you play around with it, it does things that it's not it's predictable in its unpredictability. It will come up with surprises and what I call a journey. It takes you on a journey you don't expect to go on. Particularly if you put something like a red with it or a violet, it just course, we've got the various earth colors down here, the quinacridone gold. Yeah, and then we have this last one.
Yeah.
And I think this is 134 we currently have.
Okay.
We will be adding more. I just had to launch somewhere. I mean, it started off at a point where in my original plan 20 odd years ago, I was thinking, 30 colors. And then that would have been silly. If you're doing 30, why not do 40? If you're doing 40, why not 50? And so it's gone on. And so we will be adding more. And let me talk about one or two of these here. Things like these transparent oxide browns and reds, they behave on the pigment particle is so small that they have the most dramatic effect in terms of the transparency. They're just so vivid. And then, of course, you've got colors, cosmic blue, purple haze, moonlight. I suppose, in a sense, you could probably argue that I'm showing my age, where I have the odd color name like deep purple or purple haze. It's probably alluding slightly to my old 1970s music favorites, but there we go. It's my company. I can do that sort of thing.
That's right.
Yeah. Indigo. I mean, I just can't wait for people to try them.
Yeah.
One or two people have asked if we're going to do dot cards. Thinking about it, yes, we could do this. This will still, of course, by definition, remain water soluble, and these will be available. We'll also have a leaflet, which is going to be available at the launch here in the US. A dot card, our formulation of our particular paint remains a little more sticky than some other brands. And the trouble is then, of course, if you put it up against another sheet of paint, it'll stick to it, and so it won't show itself in a good light. It doesn't remain sticky once it's painted out thinly like this, which of course is how watercolor is defined to be used. I forget if I held that steady enough for people to take a shot of it.
Yeah.
But anyway, there we go.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, I can't wait for people to try it. A lot of people ask about granulation, and you would granulation is really decided on 2 or 3 factors. It's a bit of a sort of an elusive art, if you like. Paper can sometimes appear to enhance granulation for sure, because of the little pits and troughs. Mainly, though, the nature of the pigment. So if you get a pigment which granulates in one range, expect it to granulate in another. And it's the nature of the pigment particle. And generally, we color makers are most of the time drawing from the same sources of pigment manufacturer.
Right.
Or, for instance, if you're working with a real earth color, it's dug out the ground, and they tend to be very prone to granulation because of the nature of the little particles of iron and manganese and things like that. And they will the funny thing is that I don't know if it's the same science exactly as it can take place within the oils. There's a term we paint makers use called flocculation, and that's where on a nanoscale pigment particles get drawn together by magnetism or statics, if you like, and they can reconglomerate into little globules of pigments. And in oil, it's frowned upon enormously. The one color which can do it is Prussian blue, because Prussian blue is essentially an iron-based pigment. But ironically, you watercolorists love it when it happens in watercolor, and in my mind, granulation and flocculation are sort of a very similar things. Certainly, the appearance is similar. And so, yes, if you're expecting something like a lapis to granulate, it certainly does, as does ultramarine blue. There's other factors that can play a part and slow it down and accelerate it. So, but we paint makers, as I say, we're all playing with the same laws of physics. Yes. So if you're familiar with one pigment granulating, expect it to also in our range.
Yeah, it's always amazing to me, Michael, how in depth you go into the science to create these. And I know, like the oil paints, there was a book of how all of these paints were made by masters. I can't remember the name of the book. Very, very thick book that you use to guide you into your handmade paint.
I mean, there's a lot out there on you can find books online and order them and read them as to the nature of various pigments. It's a funny thing though, because although you say that you're always surprised by the depth I go into, I also have to be very careful not to go too deep, because what I don't want to do, and people often ask me, am I a paint chemist, and I am not.
Mm-hmm.
I only learn as much chemistry, if you like, as I feel I need to know. One, because I'm not an academic person, and I was useless at chemistry at school, and I don't want to have to revisit the chemistry class. However, where it comes to making certain pigments, which I've done, like our lead whites, involving horse poop vinegar, I'm sure most of you have heard those stories.
Yeah.
I understand that chemistry, but I only know what I need to know. And fortunately, most of the time, oil paints, from my mind, very easy to make. It's the easy one. Watercolors are much, much more complex because there's many more ingredients and therefore many more things that can go wrong. Everything from mold to bacteria, doing weird things to the paint, because there's having organic materials in there like gum arabic, which the bugs like to eat, that can come with problems. So we have to put things in there to stop it. So it's only when something goes wrong, doesn't work. And my adage of always is, if it ain't bust, don't fix it. If I can get it, if I can have a good day where it just works automatically, I don't leave it alone. I think in many ways I don't want to overanalyze either the oils or the watercolors. I want to, my approach fundamentally is that of an artist. I don't want to have the great respect to paint chemists, but I don't want to, I feel that I approach this from my heart as an artist. I don't want to be approaching it as if I'm manufacturing like a chemist and it's a widget. I mean, forgive me if I'm upsetting paint chemists there. I'm like the chef in the kitchen. I taste the sauces as I go. I don't want to be the guy who's putting in all the monosodium glycols and all those E-word things that when you look on the ingredients of paint, we want to keep our paint as simple as we possibly can, and therefore resembling the stuff that the old masters and our predecessors had. I want it to be as straight and a natural pigment, natural paint as possible.
I think that's the way to learn better. You know what I'm saying? It's like the trial and error that you go through and that you went through with the watercolors. Everything that you learned from that, doing it by yourself, hands-on, creating those 134 colors. It was, quite a journey in understanding what it is that came out of all of that mixing, and instead of standing at the chalkboard with chemistry notes and figuring out the math and all that kind of stuff. I mean, that hands-on stuff is just so much more helpful and learning and keeping that in your mind, I think, than the book stuff.
That's thank you for recognizing that. I have to keep my mind in its place, that of being, if you like, in the artist's studio, for the reasons we've just stated, because that's where my consumers are, my artists, and I have to think with them. I don't want to be thinking for them and then projecting something at them. We have to, it's almost like a language.
Yeah, and I think that's where, I'm sorry, I think that's where a lot of your relationships with your ambassadors come in as well, because you're not doing this totally by yourself. You have some very well educated and wonderful artists that are your ambassadors, and their input to you is just as important as you finding this out for yourself.
Oh, totally. I mean, this is it. This is my language, and it's the language of us artists. Those of you who are listening to me today will know that, or you'll get a sense by the words I'm saying, that I'm talking like an artist. I feel the color. I am an artist. It'll be a very good one, but I'm an artist.
You are.
And there aren't the answers. And I know that there aren't the answers. And we all know that if we get at what we think is an answer, it's going to be wrong.
Right.
And that's the artistic process. There's no, by definition, there can be no perfection, because the day that someone does the perfect painting is the last day of art. It would be the end of that type of creation as we know it.
Absolutely.
Yes, we can look at some superb paintings by all the giants of the names through the centuries, but they would be the last people ever to say that that was the conclusive work. Of course, we put them on the pedestals justifiably, look up to them, and all I am really is a glorified tool maker. I put the tools in your hands, and hopefully those tools behave with your eyes and your deft of hand in a way that produces something which you all enjoy and feel is from here. So yeah, I'm unashamedly artist in some ways more than I'm paint maker. I am an artist making paint. I'm not a manufacturer of things happening today to be making paint and hoping that you artists like it. We all eat food. I'm a chef. It's that sort of, it's basic.
Absolutely. It's just, when I think back, and I want to talk a little bit about the 40 oil colors that you have coming up for your anniversary as well. But when I think back to how much I was struggling with the other brands of paints that were out there, and then I met you, and we, just like, here, play with them, right there at your booth, which I did. And I was like, well, it was like CW. And it's like, okay, this is really different.
No, but I know. I always feel like the drug dealer. The first trick is free. Then after that, the soul belongs to me. Yeah, I've got you.
Yeah. So, I mean, I remember, getting the paints, buying them, taking them back to my studio. And even to this day, I'm taking other colors that are typically not part of my limited palette, and saying, I'm going to substitute this color out for this color. And the different range of, let's just say, greens or blues or whatever that I get out of there, it's like, oh, this is going to look nice in this painting. And then again, being in Asheville versus Ohio and being in the mountains, all of the different colors of sunsets and sunrises, and just, the Blue Ridge itself with its color of blue, depending on how hot the day is or how cold the day is. It's basically gotten me to the point where I can look at something and say, I know I can mix that color because I know I got the best paints on the market that'll help me do that. And like I said, we've known each other for 10, 12 years, and I've always appreciated how open you have been to come on to the show and talk about the work that you do and the colors that you produce. And just so you know, if I take all of your art chats with us and add them together, you are our most listened to guest.
Oh, well, wow, that's made my day. I feel that's really something, because I deserve it?
You do.
I'd like to think, thank you. That's I don't know what to say. I mean, it's sort of, well, I'm delighted. I feel
speechless.
I feel innocent in this, because it's like, hang on a moment, guys, I'm only making paint here. Yeah, all I can say is it's from the heart.
Yes.
And thank you for your the kind work you do to help explain to artists out there.
Yeah, I aspire to be one of your ambassadors someday. So.
Well, we can certainly look at that. It's, in a sense, everyone's an ambassador, and
Yes.
You said a couple of interesting things a moment or two back about, when you're in Asheville and you look at certain blues and you look at them now with the confidence, thinking, yes, I can do that blue. There is, however, a point where you, Linda, when you look at that blue, you'll realize now that the more you look, the more you will see that you don't see, that there's more. It's a never-ending, I won't call it an enigma. It's almost like one of those fractile things where the more you look into it, the more there is into it, the more there is into it. The more you look at color, the more you will see that you don't know. The more you will learn, and it's a never-ending equation. The more you look at it, the more you realize that you don't know, and that's good news.
Mm-hmm. It is, and it gets you excited. It keeps you interested. All of that,
Oh yes.
If I just kept seeing that limited palette color, yeah, okay, I'm going to mix up the screen and I'm going to put up, it just becomes very mechanical versus putting yourself into the painting.
Oh yeah, and it's not as if it's like, oh, it's bad news. I thought I'd learned to do hills. Now I've realized that I can't. No, that's the good news, because
Right.
you're realizing actually you're doing a better painting, although you don't know it. You're now becoming more discerning. You're seeing more in your own work.
Mm-hmm.
It just means that you've raised your own bar higher now.
Yes.
Good news, it means that the rest of the public, when they look at your art, will see better art.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, it's a masochistic experience for the artist, and it's an odd conundrum, because it's one of those. The more we realize we're not a perfect artist, the more forgiving we have to also learn to be of ourselves.
Yes, absolutely.
Because none of us will ever truly attain the paintings we want by definition, because as our intellect grows in terms of being able to deliver. And my goodness, that painting behind you is gorgeous with those violets, by the way.
Oh,
But anyway, sorry.
okay. There's a story there. We'll talk about that. Go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. The more you intellectually see, the more you realize that you don't see and can't see and won't see. And it's the never ending conundrum of what we do. Mm. Don't be disappointed by it, because I think that the more we feel that, the better our works are becoming. We just don't know it. Unfortunately, it's it'd be quite interesting to ask someone like George Gallo. For those of you who don't know out there, George Gallo's one of our ambassadors. He's also a film director, and he's made some, box office busting films over the years. But it'd be very interesting to ask him what he would think of this, because when he makes a movie, as he calls it, he might be pleased with it. But also in his head, he's looking at it as a work of art. And I know I would almost lay money on this, that he would be going, well, yeah, it's, you guys seem to like it, but there's things there that I see and it's the next film that counts. And so it goes on. And I think that probably painting, it's another one of those manifestations of this journey we called art. Mm-hmm. None of us know the answers. Some of us have more clues perhaps than others. But it's the pleasure that counts. If you're not enjoying what you're doing, then something is wrong. I mean, I myself for years was very uncomfortable, decades, when I painted, and I didn't know why. And then I figured it out. Actually, I figured it out probably during COVID. And because I painted more in the COVID period, like most people, more than I ever had done in decades. And I couldn't leave the US, so I was housebound for something like 15 months, and I produced, well, that one for a start. I produced more paintings than I'd done in decades, but I realized I learned to forgive myself and don't beat myself up. And after all, the paintings really only for me. I'd like it if you guys also like them. But the most important thing is for me that I'm liking what I'm doing and seeing at the time, and that dialogue I'm having between materials and subject matter and what goes on in here. Mm-hmm. And that sort of fluid circle of thoughts. And as long as that feels good, and it was a sort of a moment where I just thought, well, the way the world's going, no one's ever going to see these paintings, and does it really matter what? The painting's still the painting. Mm-hmm. Painting is done. It's me having a conversation with a canvas. Mm-hmm. It doesn't really matter what the other people think at this stage. Yeah, I'd like later on for them to like things, but the essential point is to please me first. And if it doesn't please me, then something's wrong. Mm-hmm. And my problem was before in previous decades is that I was too conscious of what other people were going to think of things. So it was interfering with that circular process, because you could almost call it a vanity. The work itself was becoming too vain, because I was concerned with how people would perceive it. And as soon as I shut up about that and stopped thinking like that, I realized that in a sense, I had to be more tolerant of myself as an artist. And that's when then there was a click that took place. I don't want to call it a breakthrough, but it suddenly things were better. It was simple, and I'm not trying to claim that I suddenly had some epic wake up thing. It was just I just stopped the silliness that had been going on in my head, and now I am a happier artist for it. Whether I'm and probably a better artist, because now that the work is more natural and from my heart, without all the silly interference. And I hope you guys like my paintings, but if you don't, then so be it. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Yeah, I've got myself in a better place now in terms of my own paintings.
Yeah, it was really interesting when I started painting. We all have that conversation, I believe. And one of the things that always led me into that quagmire of, is this painting good enough? Are people going to like it? Are all the different competitions that were out there? Is the whole, you have to enter a competition to get recognized and become a master artist, and et cetera, et cetera. And then at one point I just said, there's enough competition in the world. I'm doing this for me. I'm not doing it for anybody else. And, you just start painting. It's like, and I don't have to worry about a certain, like, that's not up to my typical standards as judged by somebody else.
Yeah.
So, the violet painting that you were talking about behind me is totally different than this painting over here. That's
certainly
a
it is,
view.
yeah.
So, and this is what people are used to me painting. But with this one, as you know, since I'm in Asheville, the Biltmore estate is here, George Vanderbilt's castle, if you want to call it that, estate.
Yes.
And I always see that drawn, and I'm not putting this down. Don't think of it as a put down, but I always see this drawn in a plein air type of way, very tight. We got to get every angle of the roof and the way that the chateau, whatever you want to call it, castle is. We got to capture that because that's what George wanted us to capture. But I hardly ever see anything that's a little more abstract. So I decided going into this that my palette was going to be yellows and your amethyst and all of the violet shades that you had. And a couple of its complements in the yellow and titanium white. And I ended up with a very, beginning of an abstract painting, but just started thinking of it composition wise. Where do I want people to land, and direct it to the building, which is up here.
Yeah.
Which doesn't even look like the building at all. And then this is from the lagoon. So this is the back part of it. So, going on walks back there and looking at the back part of it and picking what I liked about it. Is it something that you could stand at the lagoon with the painting in your hand, look up and go, oh yeah, there's that tree, no.
And it doesn't matter. It's not about that.
Right. And I've never really have seen anybody do anything like this painting wise, because they always just wanted to capture the beauty of the Biltmore. And it is gorgeous. The building is gorgeous. But I didn't feel a need to recreate another one of those paintings. I wanted something different that actually started talking to the spiritualness of what that place brings to me.
And I think that comes across hugely in that painting. I mean, I don't know if you would call it more of an impressionist painting, and even trying to define it in definitions are irrelevant. The painting is what the painting is.
Right.
And I see really interesting things going on there.
And I want to just play with color. I just wanted the color to interact.
And now that the unfortunate...
Want me to bring it closer?
Yeah, of course. The tricky thing for you, Linda, is that now you've got this conundrum where you don't want to... Yeah, that's some really interesting things going on in there. Yeah. Come back a little bit.
Back this way?
Yeah, that's about it. It's now occupying the full screen. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's just got the dramas. The conundrum for you now, of course, is that now you know that painting is, shall we say, a bit of a breakthrough piece.
So it is.
So you've got to be careful where your mind goes now, because you don't want to start thinking, oh, I've got to repeat that day, and the mind gets into another little rabbit hole and trap if you're not careful. It's the state of the mind which created the painting, not painting like that. It's the state of the mind. Incidentally, just to finish up on something else I was talking about earlier on, when we beat ourselves up about these things, I have a saying, and it's a saying that I found myself saying when I was doing those paintings throughout that COVID period. It's very simple. Just shut up and paint. Because we can overthink these things and overthink them. And meanwhile, no work gets done. And it's just like, just get the paints out and paint, for goodness sake. Stop the thinking. Stop the overthinking. Just enjoy and paint.
Right.
Paint from the heart. And that's when you do your best works. And I think that is certainly a a milestone piece for you there, Linda.
Thank
It
you.
has a fluency and a love of color. Nothing wrong with the other one on the easel there, but no, there's just something more fluid and dramatic. I have to say, it's almost by two different artists.
Yeah, what's one of the things is, I can do this rather simply without thinking. This one caused me to think a lot more. So yeah, there's like 4 or 5 more paintings that I have in my mind that I want to do. And really the challenge count, I don't know if you know Jean Peterson or not, but Jean is on our board for Artistic Harmonies, and she's also an honorary member like you are. And I always told her, I always wanted to try abstracts. And so she's kind of mentoring and coaching me into, and I don't think I'll ever be a pure abstractist. And who knows, I may get there. But that was the challenge for me, is just to break out from my usual, do something unusual, and learn from, that stepping out.
Stating the obvious thing, of course, as well, is that every figurative painting is also an abstract. If you turn it upside down, it makes the point, because suddenly it's no longer a landscape with trees against the sky. It then becomes color design, and it's easier, therefore, at that point, to see the feel, just by the way that the harmonies of the colors do or don't work by that design.
Right. And go ahead. Sorry.
And therefore, no, I was only going to reiterate, therefore, every painting is also non-figurative in a sense.
Right. Yeah. It was like, I guess I kind of told myself that I'm always teaching composition and color and different things like that through my instruction classes and things. And it's like, you need to listen to yourself and just take it all the way back down to a composition that you wanted to show here, and not worry about, people absolutely recognizing what that's supposed to be. Let their imaginations figure out what that is to them. And, that kind of conversation going on in my head right now. So it'll be interesting to see where the next one comes from, because this one basically was painted over a start that I had for the Biltmore, and decided that I didn't like where it was going. So I was like, well, okay, let's just play and see what comes out. And I have another one over here that I don't like, and I'm going to end up playing with that one. And it happens to be shrimp boats. So, and I have in my mind exactly what I want to do, and we'll see where your paints take me.
Well, I should look forward to seeing them. Yeah, it's a very one can have interesting moments when you don't like something, and there's a couple of ways you can remedy it. I have another phrase. You can either attack it, and you got to go into it as if it's literally like a battle, like a fight, physical fight, that as if you're really angry with it, and take the boldest brushes and literally scratch as if there's swashbucklingly sword sort of thing. You can literally gesturally just kick the living what out of that painting, because if it ain't a good painting already, you've got nothing to lose. You can only ever win.
Right.
You can only ever go up.
Yep.
And it's a very interesting things happen like that. And also, you touched on another thing, is that sometimes we can make things over serious. If you sort of set yourself up, right, today I'm going to try really hard, and I'm going to do a really good painting. It's going to be a disaster.
Right.
You need to make every day. So it's like, you know what, guys, I'm just going to go out, and I've always liked looking at the Biltmore. I'm going to look at it as, it's, I'm just going to have fun with her today, because I love the way that those trees are that shape and do that thing with the light there. Oh yeah, this is fun. This is fun. That's where you want to be going. It's not like, I'm going to make this one work. The more you try like that, the more it won't work. Yeah, there's some beautiful architectural drawings and things, but they're illustrations. They're a different thing.
Right. Yeah, it is really interesting as well. I mean, when you try to understand the art market and where it's going as well, that's a moving target. So,
that's another thing altogether. And
I
think it's where you can talk to an artist like, say, Jeremy Lipking. And, Jeremy is a superb artist, and of course he sells incredibly well. He's very successful, and he immediately sprung to mind as being a guy who as you call it, that moving target of, you know, the art market. I don't think Jeremy would, but it's okay for Jeremy because he sells well anyway. I think if you were able to get into Jeremy's head, he would probably be thinking about, you know, if it was a commission, be thinking about what the commissioner wanted.
Right.
But I don't think Jeremy's head would be thinking about, oh, I need to look at what this gallery is looking for nowadays, or what have I noticed selling well recently. I think once you start going there, it's a disaster because, and it's not a question of whether it's cowboys and horses this month or sparkling sea of Bermuda the next. It's if your work is good, your work will sell probably or possibly. It has a greater possibility of selling, and it doesn't matter what the subject matter is. It does matter how it's depicted, because that all becomes part of the honesty process.
Right.
It has to be honest, and I think that phrase honesty is another big one in terms of what we're doing. There has to be an authenticity about it that has to be a naivety as well. It's a balance. It's an interesting balance, and it's when we stop having that. I think it's what David Lafell calls the editor, the inner editor. Switch the editor off. I think he's always saying. Then you paint from here, and that's when the mind can make the deeper judgments, and then inadvertently you'll step back and people will start going, wow, that's a bit different. Oh yes. And then they go, is that for sale? That's what you want to hear.
Right.
But you can't make it happen. It has to happen by accident almost.
Yeah. Remember back when I was painting in your booth at Art of the Carolinas, and David Goldstein challenged me to paint with a totally different palette.
Different colors. It was
different colors. Yeah. And I know that you were a little worried, as I was too, because it was like, is this going to work? Because I picked up colors that I typically wouldn't pick up. And that was some violet and gold going on in there as well. And David loved it, even though he told me he was going to hang it in his bathroom.
For those of you who don't know, this is David Goldstein of Jerry's Artorama. I mean, David is an avid collector of art. He has a very interesting eye for art, and he's looked at a lot of it. So probably that day when he knew how to perhaps put a new element into your mind. He did, to stir it up a bit and up the game, and yeah, it worked. Yep. And it was like, this we're talking 10, 12 years ago. So I was a totally different artist then than I am today. But it was just, I noticed he was pulling artists over and saying, look how, pretty far behind me, but I still knew what was going on. It was like, oh my God, I just want to shrink, but it was a good challenge. It taught me a lot. And, it was quite an honor to have him say, yeah, I love it. I'm taking it home. And it's like, okay, cool. That's nice. Yeah. What better accolade than that? Yeah. So, okay. So let's get into the 40 colors. If you have some that you would like to share with us, oil colors that you've got coming out for your anniversary. Let me just go and grab them in a box down here on the table. Okay. Let's do I'll show some watercolor tubes first. Great. Just so people can try and present them in these little boxes here. They come in 15mm tubes. We are contemplating doing pans next year or in the next 20 years. They have a look so that you can characteristically recognize them as being a Michael Harding product. We've got a blue flash as our logo here rather than the oils. Sorry, okay, I'll say it again. We have slightly different tubes, although it's the Michael Harding look. You can see that the logo's got a blue flash over it indicating water, which is of course same sort of metallic looking tubes. Right. As I say, we will try and do pans perhaps next year or the next 20 years. Just give you a sort of probably with them dropping out like that. So there you go. I try and make them the obviously it's a printed ink version of the color indicator on top there. Right. As explained before, we can't use real paint for obvious reasons. Yes. More boxes here. The website, of course, is the go-to. I quite like the way I can look through that. That's quite fun, isn't it? Yeah.
You look like that mad scientist now.
Yeah, this is a special eye hole so that when I demonstrate the paintings, I can watch the audience like
There you go.
the kid in me coming to light. Yeah. So there we go. And then, I mean, obviously there's 130 odd colors. There's 130 odd colors. I can keep putting
Right.
boxes up like this.
Oh,
I mean, I
wow.
just love everyone to try them.
Yes.
And then the oils, I'll name a few so that people can start to get an idea
Okay.
of things that are coming. I have now the first color, which is just going to, I don't know if the light is on that. Yes, that is as bright as it looks. It's almost fluorescent. It's
Wow.
opera rose. It's a pigment that people will see of opera rose. When we made it into watercolor, it was just literally dazzling.
Wow.
So we're putting that, and people probably look and think, what? I don't know if I can say this. What the hell? That's deemed as cursing in America or not. What the hell am I going to use that color for? But why not? It would work in the painting you're doing of the yeah. Still life, flowers, and what the hell? I mean, let's just have some fun. And of course, it doesn't have to remain that bright. You can obviously tone it down, and that's made from a quinacridone and a special pigment that helps in there to make it fluorescent. Then I've got things like vivid blue, which is a mix there, which is another. We tend to find that the convenience colors like King's Blues and Pale Violets are very, very popular. So knowing that a lot of artists like the sort of the colors that have a sort of radiance, so we included this vivid blue. We've got Verditer Blue, which is not the real original pigment. And as I'm sitting, I can't remember the chemistry of the original pigment, because when it's in oil, it goes green. And this is a synthesized version. Again, it's a mix. Okay, single pigment wise, permanent brown, for instance, which is a pigment brown 25. So that's an organic brown. It's like a more transparent version of umber. It's much cleaner.
Yeah,
it's a wonderful, wonderful color for a portraitist. Brilliant orange. Now I've been using this paint. You can see it's actually the tube. These are meant to be my the things I experiment with. I suppose doing my own painting is now, can I get a decent sky with that? I mean, that's going to probably become my after I've done the two watercolors, my root canal sunrise. I mean, that's and that's pigment orange 62, that one.
Yep, that would work for a lot of the sunsets and sunrises here in the mountains too.
Yeah, I just want to smell it as well.
Don't eat it.
Yeah, no, it's just it's just, you know when something's right because it smells right. Then we have a color called Purple Discovery, and I think when we were messing around, we actually made this by mistake, and just someone kept on going like, "Hang on a minute, what is this? It looks great." So that's Purple Discovery. In fact, that probably became Belladonna thinking about it.
Okay.
Quinacridone Coral.
Oh, wow.
And that is Pigment Red 209. Obviously the quinacridone family, very light fast. And again, it's just another red that's going to give opportunities for vivid pinks and things like that. Other convenience colors, lavender, wisteria. I can't remember how many of these are single pigment, probably about half.
Okay.
There's one I want people to see. Oh my goodness, I started working with this. Turner's Yellow, Pigment Yellow 216. It's one of those heavy ones.
Yeah, named after JM.
Yeah, the man himself. Yeah. And it is just, it fills that area of lean colors with a much more sort of, yes, we've got genuine Naples yellows and other colors in that area and the synthetic Naples, but this really goes into a yellow area that's not addressed at the moment. And I think also the name says it all. It's the sort of the real Turner's Yellow is not light fast. So this one is now identical color but light fast. So we've got some.
I have to get a tube of that.
Yeah, indeed.
Especially for the next one that I'm doing with the boats.
Yeah, the next boat one. Yeah, another quinacridone. This is Pigment Red 202.
Okay.
Another one of
Yeah,
the
that's nice.
a more violety color.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, I could just go on and on with these. Quinacridone purple, pigment red 55. Sorry, PV 55. Yeah, PV 55.
Okay.
Another one of the quinacridones, which is, I mean, the quinacridones are a family of sort of reds through to oranges and, you know, violets, and they just are. Oh. So that this was
Gorgeous.
another one, which when I saw it in the watercolor, it had to also be in the oils. So there we go.
Yep.
Another shade of cobalt blue.
Mhm.
This is an interesting one,
Darker.
Herculean red, and
Oh.
it's a natural earth, but it's so vivid.
Uh-huh.
It's almost verging on an orange quinacridone, but it's just, that's a single pigment. Yeah, that's really interesting. Bismuth vanadate, obviously a family of yellows, which are very, very useful to us nowadays. Pigment yellow 184. And as I say, these were all colors which perform so wonderfully in the watercolors. I just had to play around with them in the oils.
Yes.
And just Florindo maroon, pigment red 179. I mean, it's sort of in the family of clarets around the alizarin areas. Very light fast though. Yeah, it's just gorgeous.
Yeah.
I mean, some of these are other color makers have probably already got some of them in their ranges. The other phthalocyanine blue, the red shade version, the 15.1. That's this one.
Nice.
This is real color strip on here. So if you
Right.
guys at home are looking, or rather in your studios are looking and seeing it, yes, that is real paint in this case. And then we've got things like Hooker's Green, named after the founders of Kew Garden in the UK, Joseph Hooker and his father. And you know all those botanical drawings that. So
Right.
this is it's a convenience color of 3 pigments there, but that is just from a landscaper's point of view.
Yes. Yeah, I can see it.
You know, be it an English landscape or a US one, it'll work in either. And then we've got other things similar like moss green. It's so funny because names really sell paint, and we found that these, particularly the moss green, is selling incredibly well in the watercolors, because I think people sort of look at the name and it inspires them to find the subject matter and paint. Which is all right. It's you know, it might be seen as a bit lazy in terms of is that what you really need to stimulate you rather than the subject matter stimulating you, but does it matter?
No. So a quick question, Michael, while you're showing these, do you find that a lot of the artists just, which is good for you, buy a large number of your paints and don't do much mixing? Or do you have a number of artists who will, because they want something to go on a warmer atmosphere, change out palettes, certain colors on their palettes to achieve that?
If you take 10 artists, they're all going to approach it in 10 different ways.
Right.
Well, having said that, some might have their 10 or a dozen favorite go-to colors, and they'll then, if they change to mine, they will just change across to those names or color index numbers. Some of them might change one at a time. I do have a few artists who've come up to me before and just said, I'll have one of everything.
Right. In which case they're probably
explore like that. I mean, David Hockney, I remember back in the 90s when he started using our colors, he would just, I won't shock you with the amount that he asked for, but it was crazy. It was wonderful. You know, he would just have several 225 tubes of each color,
right,
to do his experiment with. Just asked for one of everything in the range. Well, it was actually 8 of everything in the range, if I remember correctly. And that was his way of experimenting with the range. But David, of course, paints on a huge scale and really wants to get into it.
Yeah, I just remember back when I first started, and I'm talking first started, picked up a brush and learning all of the things that you have to learn at the beginning. And my mixing skills weren't as good as they are today. You know, oh, okay, I need a purple. So I go out and I buy this is the purple I want. Now it's the challenge of changing up my palette and mixing different colors instead of just staying in that ultramarine blue, cadmium red, yellow, cadmium yellow, titanium white limited palette. It's a challenge for me now to say, let's add this, see what happens to the colors I'm mixing so that I can get a wider range of color versus painting directly out of the tube, because you have to understand values.
Yeah, I think color mixing and exploring colors, the way they interact, is essential.
Mm-hmm.
Having also, I remember I got when I was a school kid, I got criticized unfairly one day where an art teacher accused me of just using one color from a tube to achieve color of grass, and I said no, and he said, oh no, that's just one color, and he said that's bad discipline to use the color straight from the tube straight. And I said no, I didn't, I actually mixed this.
Right.
I sincerely did mix. I put about 3 colors in that, but never mind. However, I will argue that if the color straight from the tube is right for the painting, then it's right for the painting.
For the painting, right.
And the rules are the rules are the rules, and rules are silly and there to be broken. So if it's right, then and it comes straight from the tube, so be it.
Yeah. I didn't mean to imply that was wrong. I just there are various ways to address and approach mixing and not mixing.
Yeah, I think in the same way that that day that David Goldstein suggested to mix it up a bit and throw a few wild cards in to see how you fared, it was a healthy thing from a sort of a discipline point of view, and forcing you to explore and think outside the box. Absolutely. Right. I remember one day when we sent paint to Ricky Mojica. Ricky was used to painting with a certain palette, and he requested alizarin crimson. And we didn't have any alizarin crimson here, but he was desperate for something. So we sent him magenta, quinacridone magenta, pigment red 122, which of course, as you artists out there will know, is quite a different animal.
Yes.
But now he's addicted to the magenta. He moved over, and there's things you can do to magenta which would get it quite close into the realm of alizarin. One would be to put transparent oxide red or a brown with it. That will move it over quite quickly.
Right.
Without hugely changing its nature, it'd still be sort of a transparent. But no, now he jokes about this and says, since you guys introduced me to magenta, I can't paint without it. So yes, there are, there's been the odd time though when I've been trying to achieve a color. I've done a fair few sunsets recently, and I found that sometimes you can't quite, you can see the color you want, but you can't do it with the colors that you got on your palette.
Mm-hmm.
And so intellectually, there's 2 ways of, as I said before, if you back engineered it, so you choose the color first, which is going to be the difficult color, and back engineer everything from there. Because take my my morning sunrise, that vivid orange glow which was there is going to be the hard part.
Mm-hmm.
If I've got, say, dark browny black foreground, that's easy to get.
Mm-hmm.
What you don't want to do, of course, is you build up to the glow and then find you can't achieve it because the colors just don't have the range.
Mm-hmm.
If you started with the glow and come back from it, then you've achieved it, and that's the way I'm going to approach that particular one.
Right.
And I remember I was doing a sunset, and I just couldn't quite get. There was a certain red that I just wasn't getting with, and I'd look around and be thinking, "Is it me? Am I mad? Am I losing my touch here in terms of color mixing?" And I went for a Pyrrol 264.
Yep.
And it just has a certain coldness about it that just delivered the red. And it was just like, yeah, I thought I knew about color. Just learned a lesson here today, because it was just literally a poke in the eye to make me realize I still don't see all. I still, and fortunately the color was, and it was, I was trying to go warm as the solution, and it wasn't. It was cold. And it's still, even to this day, I think it was because I got to the point where I put out every single red I had, including these new guys, and I just was process of elimination. And then this was the surprise. It was a color which didn't look like it was going to do it, but did.
Yeah.
And that was, still trying to get my head around what happened. And it always doesn't
Yep.
matter because it
It worked.
solved the problem.
Yep.
And so, yeah, it's the thing about painting is that every day is new.
Yeah.
Every day is a surprise. Some days, we like predictability because as human beings, predictability makes us feel comfortable. We like our comfort zones.
Yep.
But like the painting behind you, of the Biltmore, that was an unpredictable day, and you approached it unpredictably, and look what happened.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, good result.
Yeah, I'm glad that you like that one. So,
Yeah,
it's
indeed.
all right. So, Michael, thank you so much for telling us about your journey with the watercolors and introducing us to some of the other additional oil colors that you have coming out on the 40th anniversary. And the watercolors and this art chat will be hopefully coinciding with the launch of your watercolors in there. So I'll be checking back with you and Karen and making sure that we sync that up appropriately. And it's always nice to see you and Karen. If you're ever down this way, please let us know.
Of course.
So,
and thank you for the opportunity. It's as you could tell, I probably get a little excited, but
that's good.
It's what I love, and not surprisingly, I'm going to be planning my root canal painting today.
Good.
That's going to work out.
Hopefully we provided you some inspiration and wanting to get back there behind that easel. So,
Oh, most certainly. I mean, seeing the paints like this, it would, it's everyone's a teaser.
Yep. Absolutely.
They can be a tormentor, but they're hopefully a teaser in a positive way.
Okay. So again, thank you, Michael.
Thank
Thanks,
you,
everyone.
everybody.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone, for listening, and we'll catch you next time.
Thank you, everybody. Take care. Keep painting.
Art Chat is made possible by the support of the Artistics Harmonies Association. Create your next aha experience with us.